And I think your point earlier, regarding sort of the shift in the industry, the getting, pharma being way more involved with sort of government as a means to, help mitigate government's medical costs. The term that I think is appropriate is regulatory capture, and
Mm,
the piece that goes in there, I think for a lot of people is to, they see this like revolving door between these agencies like CDC and FDA, between the companies they're supposed to be regulating, and as an outsider
hmm
to some extent, you're like, oh, I guess it kind of makes sense, helps them make better decisions because they understand how the system works because they're been on both sides. But the problem with the regulatory capture concept is not that these people are corrupt or incompetent, but that you sort of used the term, or you didn't use this term earlier, but you spoke to the idea of like compartmentalization, and between
hmm
conflicts of interest and very narrow sort of lifelong, careers, let's say, working with, use vaccine as an example. Oh, I know the benefit, and sort of like, because of that regulatory capture, they're not independent. They're not fulfilling the role that we as society think of them as. Oh, they're the regular. They're protecting the customer. But the way they're protecting
hmm
the customer is, by lowering the financial burden on the healthcare system to the government, as opposed to,
hmm
I would say we don't, as far as I understand, there's almost no independent study from those regulatory bodies. They're relying on the studies from those companies. And again, as you sort of said,
hmm
there's the incentive to shift things. And I just want to wrap up with the regulatory capture concept. When you look at the government's sort of like dirty dozen list of, people who are spreading vaccine misinformation, the one guy on there, Robert Kennedy Jr., has an experience going after the government's EPA with regards to regulatory capture, regarding the coal and mining
hmm
industry. And so it's peculiar to see someone on that list who has a history of exposing regulatory capture. And I look at it and see, the different things. Like, what I didn't really realize the stuff you described with regards to the industry sort of shifting, but I did see that revolving door
hmm
criticize, people going in and out of companies, and in and out of the agencies. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
I just wonder.
Oh, sorry, just on the
Yeah.
regulatory capture, but just like a couple last pieces on the business side, and it kind of loops back to this whole mandate thing is what's better than having access to a continual market, right?
Hmm.
Is the ability to develop a product very cost effectively. So mRNA technology is like having a little printer in your backyard from usually the development costs for vaccines are extraordinary in the sense you have to go through animal models and testing and all this kind of stuff. And, then you've got to, manufacture your vaccine, and there's all sorts of, regulatory requirements and, standards that you have to meet. But with these mRNA vaccines, basically, they just get these little lipid nanoparticles and, do gene sequencing, which is like really kind of like printing, right?
Hmm.
And then it's done, right? So the cost of manufacturing and the time to which you can actually produce a product is extremely low. So you've got lots of
Opportunity.
benefit on that side too, because you don't actually have to, the development cost, the actual manufacturing costs and timelines are the timelines are compressed and the costs are much lower.
Mm.
So, but then if you can convince people, right? So, on that note, like you again, remember that the best marketing is done through either appeal to authority or appeal to emotion, right? So, if you can
Hmm.
convince the whole population that they're terrified, and then the people demand the government do something, right? And then basically the government says, "Oh my gosh, I'm politically invested in the sense that I don't want to lose my position, so I better move to the will of the people who are terrified." So if you can be a pharmaceutical company or any entity that then can work through these advocacy groups, these people, maybe if you have control of mainstream media and you can terrify everybody by misrepresenting data,
Hmm.
then you've got high emotions, and then the people will petition their government to do something, which will then get the government. They're already very involved in vaccines, so they start doing their own thing, and then you get the government to market. So then you don't even have any costs for marketing, right? And on
Yep.
top of that, also, you're supposed to do post marketing trials, and you can get the governments to do those or
Mm.
even waive the need for it. And then, if you keep your fear machine going, then you can convince the people that they need boosters to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
So then you can just print something every 4 to 5 months, and it's the pharmaceutical dream come true, right? So I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying that any of that's actually happening,
Just
but
opportunity.
knowing the business and knowing the thing and seeing the pattern, and I watch the pharma headlines, every day. I'm monitoring them continually, and there's a big move between pharmaceutical companies to figure out ways that they can streamline development to make access to good vaccines more effective. And really what that means in marketing, or jumbo terms, is that they want to develop a surrogate endpoint whereby vaccines are now approved just based on antibody titers. So you don't have to do any safety, you don't have to do anything else. We'll just assume that they're effective. And as long as they can produce antibody titers, then they can print these mRNA vaccines for anything.
Mm.
So, if we think that this is stopping here, the government has basically bought enough vaccine boosters for everybody to get one every 2 or 3 months or something like that. And the machine, there's a Moderna plant going in Canada, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to print mRNA vaccines.
Are they hiring?
This is the beginning. Yeah, exactly. This is the beginning of something really quite larger than this, right? And if you can force vaccinate people, even better.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got complete capture.
Even more reason why safety is of utmost importance. It sounds like the technology is very promising and could be very beneficial, but if you're not doing it safely,
And if the government's very active feels very comfortable in just telling people what they need to take, then I could see how this could get to be very destructive.
Yeah.
And again, they're recommending boosters now, but they haven't done any safety testing to see what the effect of cumulative boosters are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, there's no 3-shot trials.
No, there's no, there was no big gap between the 2 doses trials. There was no mixing and matching trials. There's no booster trials. So all of a sudden, the government kind of went from requiring very little evidence to make a decision to then getting actively and promoting a vaccine, then now to disregarding the need for safety and efficacy altogether, and just unilaterally deciding what's good for us and limiting our livelihoods if we disagree. So I think vaccine mandates are very concerning, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not about the goodwill. Like, it's not about you should really help granny by getting your vaccine and stop the spread of the disease, because I don't think it's really about that at all. I think it's about standing up for medical ethics and our right to informed consent and to be free of coercion whenever it comes to making treatment decisions. It's about personal responsibility in order to maintain our health, and also to make sure that we're taking treatments that are good for us, and while considering others, making sure that they're responsible for keeping themselves safe. And I think too that as Christians, there's a lot of people who've been looking to Romans 13 in terms of saying, we should follow the state.
Mm-hmm.
However, if the state starts to do things that are harmful to large segments of society, and to bend the truth and to coerce and manipulate their people, I think as Christians, we're the first that need to stand and speak up against it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of concern right now. I think, I'm really appreciative of a lot of the inside information you gave, in the sense that, I kept thinking about the economics sort of principles at play in terms of incentives, regulatory capture. We didn't throw this term around yet, but you were talking about governments, and really there's the economic concept of public choice theory. And without getting into it, I always describe it to people. It's like, so many people put themselves in the place of government and think, oh, if it was me, here's how I would act, without really understanding how politicians have such a different level of incentives in the way that they operate and think and make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I always have said from the very beginning, people have asked me, why is this happening? What, or what's the motivations? And I always say, for the politician, the biggest concern they have is acting when the public thinks they need to act. Because acting when they shouldn't, they can always say it would have been so much worse. And it's very, very difficult to prove that statement wrong.
That's very true. Yeah. And I think the last thing for Christians, and I know you want to wrap up, so it'll be my last thought, but I really think that as Christians, we really need to be looking for idolatry in our hearts, right?
Mm.
And when I think of idolatry, I'm thinking about we've idolized the medical system. We've always
Mhm.
looked to the medical system to save us, and I'm the first out there to say that, right? Because I'm actively involved in it. But when you trust an idol blindly, it will always destroy you, right? So
Mm.
I think, there's a lot of blind trust that we've given the medical system. Oh, they're a doctor, they must know what they're talking about. And we've just kind of parked our brains. And I don't think that's appropriate for Christians because we do need to be discerning truth and we do need to be active in our love, which means that we need to be protecting the vulnerable. And I think we've idolized government. The
Mhm.
government will save me from this pandemic and what they're doing must be right. So, unfortunately, I think a couple of our collective idols, and I think that they've infiltrated the church, are coming home to roost.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know,
Mm.
we're
Mhm.
we're captured now fully by what we trusted.
Please subscribe and hit the bell to stay up to date. If you liked or disliked the snippet, give it a like and share your 2 cents with us in the comment section. And remember, 6 cents makes change.